There are people who will look into your eyes like they've found home and then spend the next week pretending they never needed anyone at all. That confusion can break you if you do not understand what is really happening beneath the surface, because sometimes the person pulling away from you is not disconnected. Sometimes they are terrified by how deeply connected they actually feel. And if you don't understand the games avoidants play when they're in love, you will misread fear as rejection. You will mistake silence for absence of feeling. You will think distance means you are unwanted. But many times the exact opposite is true. You must understand this. Human beings do not run from what they hate. They run from what overwhelms them. An avoidant personality often learned early in life that emotions were unsafe. Vulnerability felt dangerous. Depending on people led to disappointment, pain, shame, or loss. So they built survival patterns. They became self-contained, independent, emotionally guarded. They learned to protect themselves by needing nobody, but then love enters their life. Real love, not attraction, not chemistry, not ego validation, real connection. And suddenly their entire emotional defense system goes to war with itself. One side says, move closer. The other side screams, run before you get hurt. That internal conflict creates behaviors that confuse the people who love them most. One day they pull you close. The next day they become distant. One moment they make you feel chosen. The next moment they disappear emotionally. They text less. They become colder. They seem distracted, detached, hard to read, and you start asking yourself dangerous questions. Did I do something wrong? Am I not enough? Why are they changing? No. Listen carefully. People who fear intimacy often retreat the moment feelings become real, because closeness activates fear. Love activates vulnerability. Vulnerability activates old wounds. So they play games they don't even fully understand themselves. The first game is emotional withdrawal after intimacy. The moment you have a deep conversation, the moment you connect powerfully, the moment they feel exposed emotionally, they disappear a little. Why? Because closeness feels intoxicating to them, but also terrifying. They need space to regain emotional control. And if you don't understand this, you will chase harder, you will panic, you will over-text, you will over-explain, and the more you chase, the more trapped they feel. Understand this principle of human psychology. Pressure never creates safety. Love grows where safety exists. If someone fears emotional engulfment, your desperation becomes proof that intimacy is dangerous. Your anxiety confirms their fear. That's why strength matters, calmness matters, emotional certainty matters. The second game avoidants play is sending mixed signals. They want you close, but not too close. They want love, but fear dependence. They crave connection, but resist vulnerability. So they oscillate between warmth and distance. One day they speak about the future. The next day they act emotionally unavailable. One week they pursue you intensely. The next week they seem numb. This inconsistency can become addictive if you are not conscious, because the human brain gets trapped chasing emotional unpredictability. You begin working for validation instead of receiving love naturally. And this is where many people lose themselves. They abandon their standards trying to win the avoidance affection. They become emotional performers. They overgive, overanalyze, oversacrifice. But love was never meant to require self-abandonment. Real love does not demand that you shrink your worth to fit someone's fears. And here is the truth most people never hear. You cannot heal someone by bleeding for them. You cannot love somebody into emotional maturity if they refuse to face themselves, because eventually, every avoidant reaches a crossroads in life. Either they become conscious of their patterns, or they continue destroying intimacy while secretly craving it. And if they are unconscious, they will create emotional tests. That's the third game. They test whether you will abandon yourself trying to keep them. They pull away to see if you panic. They become distant to see if you chase. They create uncertainty to see whether your identity collapses without reassurance. Now hear this carefully. The strongest response is not control. It is grounded certainty. People respect what remains emotionally centered under pressure. When you know your value, you stop reacting to every emotional wave. You stop begging for consistency. You stop trying to convince somebody to choose you. You understand something powerful. Love given freely is beautiful. Love forced through fear is exhausting. And many avoidants secretly fall deeply in love with people who remain emotionally strong without becoming cold. People who can say, I care about you deeply, but I will not abandon myself to keep you comfortable. That energy changes everything because avoidants are often waiting for the other person to become emotionally overwhelming, needy, controlling, or demanding. That expectation comes from past experiences and unresolved fears. But when someone responds with calm confidence instead of emotional chaos, it disrupts the pattern. Now suddenly safety becomes possible. The fourth game is silence. Silence is their shield. When emotions intensify, many avoidants stop communicating clearly. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they fear saying the wrong thing, feeling too much, or losing control emotionally. And silence can feel cruel when you are on the receiving end, but never forget, silence often hides emotional overload. Now that does not mean you tolerate disrespect forever. It does not mean you accept emotional neglect endlessly. Boundaries matter, standards matter, self-respect matters. Love without boundaries becomes self-destruction. And one of the greatest lessons in relationships is learning the difference between understanding someone's wounds and becoming imprisoned by them. Compassion should never require self-betrayal. You can understand someone's fear without allowing it to consume your peace. And this leads to the most important truth of all. Avoidants do not need someone to save them. They need someone who inspires emotional safety through strength, honesty, and authenticity, not games, not manipulation, not emotional pressure. True transformation happens when a person realizes they no longer need to run from love to survive, but that realization must come from within them. And your responsibility is not to force awakening. Your responsibility is to remain aligned with your own dignity, purpose, and emotional truth. Because the moment you stop chasing unavailable love, you become powerful again. The moment you stop begging for reassurance, you reconnect with your worth. The moment you realize that somebody's inability to receive love is not proof that you are hard to love, your entire life changes. You stop personalizing every withdrawal. You stop shrinking yourself for acceptance. You stop confusing emotional struggle with destiny. And suddenly you become magnetic, not because you played games, but because you became emotionally free. Here is what emotionally healthy love looks like. Two people choosing each other consciously. Two people communicating honestly. Two people facing fear instead of hiding behind it. Two people creating peace instead of confusion. Love should challenge you to grow, not force you to constantly question your value. So if you are loving an avoidant, remember this. Do not lose yourself trying to prove you are worthy of being loved. You were worthy before they arrived. You are worthy during the confusion, and you will remain worthy no matter how their story unfolds. Stand in your strength. Lead with compassion. Protect your peace. And never forget this powerful truth. The right relationship will not require you to abandon your soul just to keep someone from running away. There are moments in a relationship that feel almost magical. A deep conversation at midnight, a vulnerable confession. A long hug that says more than words ever could. Eye contact that feels like two souls recognizing each other. In those moments, connection feels undeniable. You feel closer than ever before. You believe the walls are finally coming down, and then suddenly, everything changes. The text becomes shorter. The energy shifts. The warmth cools down. The person who was emotionally present yesterday now feels distant, distracted, unavailable. They take longer to reply. They seem quieter, less expressive. Maybe they even disappear for a few days emotionally. And if you do not understand avoidant behavior, this shift can destroy your confidence. You begin questioning yourself. Did I say too much? Did I scare them away? Was the connection fake? Why would someone pull away right after intimacy? But this is one of the most misunderstood dynamics in human relationships. Avoidants often create emotional distance immediately after moments of deep connection because closeness activates fear inside them, not hatred, not lack of feeling, fear. You must understand what is happening beneath the surface. When someone with avoidant tendencies experiences emotional intimacy, it can feel overwhelming to their nervous system. Deep down, many of them learned that vulnerability equals danger. Depending on someone emotionally once led to pain, disappointment, rejection, shame, or loss. So even though they crave love like everyone else, closeness can unconsciously trigger panic. Imagine wanting warmth while simultaneously fearing fire. That is the emotional contradiction many avoidants live with every day. When the relationship remains casual, they feel safe. They can flirt, laugh, pursue, and enjoy connection without pressure. But the moment emotions become real, the moment they feel truly seen, truly attached, truly vulnerable, their internal alarm system activates, and suddenly they need distance. Not because the connection meant nothing, sometimes because it meant too much. This is why, after an intense emotional moment, they may suddenly focus on work, hobbies, friends, or isolation. They may become quieter, less affectionate, more analytical. They pull back to regain emotional control because intimacy makes them feel exposed. The tragedy is that the other person usually reacts with anxiety, and that reaction often intensifies the cycle. When someone withdraws, the natural instinct is to move closer, to seek reassurance, to ask questions, to fix the distance immediately. But when you chase an avoidant during their emotional retreat, they often feel pressured instead of comforted. Your urgency confirms their fear that relationships will consume their freedom or overwhelm them emotionally. So the more one person pursues, the more the other retreats. This creates a painful dance where both people secretly want love but trigger each other's deepest fears. One fears abandonment, the other fears engulfment, and neither understands that they are reacting from old emotional survival patterns. That is why emotional intelligence matters so deeply in relationships. You cannot interpret every withdrawal personally. Sometimes people are battling emotions they do not know how to process. Sometimes silence is not absence of care. It is emotional overload. But here is the important truth. Understanding someone's fear does not mean abandoning your own needs. Too many people become trapped trying to earn consistency from emotionally unavailable partners. They think if they love harder, give more, stay more patient, eventually the other person will stop running. But relationships cannot thrive when one person constantly sacrifices their emotional stability trying to hold everything together. Healthy love requires communication, self-awareness, and willingness from both sides. An avoidant who becomes conscious of their patterns can absolutely learn to stay present through intimacy. They can learn that love is not a threat. They can learn that vulnerability is not weakness. But transformation only happens when someone is willing to face themselves honestly, and your role is not to become smaller to accommodate another person's fear. Your role is to remain grounded in your worth while offering connection without losing your identity, because the strongest energy in any relationship is not desperation. It is calm certainty, the ability to say, I care about you deeply, but I will not betray myself chasing temporary emotional availability. That kind of strength changes relationships. When you stop reacting from panic, you create space for clarity. You stop feeding fear with fear. You stop interpreting distance as proof that you are unlovable, and you begin to realize something powerful. Someone pulling away after intimacy is not always a reflection of your value. Sometimes it is a reflection of the battle happening inside them, the battle between the desire to love and the fear of what love requires. One of the most painful experiences in relationships is loving someone who cannot communicate their emotions directly. Instead of simply saying, I'm scared, I need reassurance, or I care about you deeply, they create tests. Invisible emotional obstacles, little games designed to measure your reaction, your patience, your loyalty, and your emotional strength. And the dangerous part is this: most avoidants are not even fully aware they are doing it. These behaviors are often unconscious survival strategies developed long before you entered their life. At some point, they learned that vulnerability was risky. Trusting people led to disappointment. Depending on someone emotionally felt unsafe. So instead of openly expressing needs, they learn to protect themselves indirectly. That protection becomes emotional testing. An avoidant may delay responding to messages even when they care deeply about you. They may suddenly become distant after things feel close. They may act emotionally cold to see whether you become needy or reactive. They may withdraw affection, cancel plans, or create uncertainty, not because they do not care, but because they are watching how you handle instability. What are they truly testing? Whether you are emotionally safe, whether you will overwhelm them, whether you will control them, whether love with you will cost them their independence, whether your emotions become chaotic the moment connection feels uncertain. And here is the tragedy. Most people fail these tests not because they are weak, but because they become emotionally triggered. The moment distance appears, panic enters. The mind begins creating stories. They are losing interest. I'm being abandoned. I need to fix this immediately. And suddenly the relationship becomes fueled by fear instead of trust. People start over-texting, over-explaining, seeking reassurance constantly, monitoring every small change in energy. They abandon their emotional center, trying to force certainty from someone who already struggles with intimacy. But emotional chasing rarely creates connection. It creates pressure. You must understand a powerful truth about human psychology. People feel safest around emotional stability, not emotional desperation. An avoidant may secretly crave closeness, but they also fear being emotionally consumed. So when your anxiety becomes overwhelming, it confirms their belief that relationships are dangerous, demanding, and exhausting. That is why emotional strength becomes attractive, not coldness, not pretending not to care. Real grounded strength, the ability to stay connected to yourself even when someone else becomes emotionally inconsistent. This is what emotionally mature people understand. Your peace cannot depend entirely on another person's temporary behavior. If someone takes longer to respond, you do not collapse. If someone becomes distant for a moment, you do not lose your identity. If uncertainty appears, you do not immediately betray your self-worth trying to regain control, because true confidence says, I can love deeply without abandoning myself. And that energy changes relationships. Avoidants often expect people to become emotionally reactive. They expect guilt, pressure, emotional explosions, manipulation, or constant demands for reassurance. Why? Because many of them experience relationships where emotions felt overwhelming or unsafe. So when someone responds differently, with calmness, honesty, and self-respect, it disrupts the pattern. Now suddenly they feel curiosity instead of pressure. They begin to realize that intimacy does not always lead to emotional chaos. But let's be clear about something important. Understanding these tests does not mean tolerating unhealthy behavior forever. There is a difference between patience and self-abandonment. Too many people stay trapped trying to prove they are worthy of love. They think if they pass enough emotional tests, eventually the avoidant will fully open up. But relationships are not supposed to feel like endless emotional auditions. Love should not require constant performance. You should not have to earn basic consistency by sacrificing your mental peace. Healthy relationships are built on communication, honesty, accountability, and emotional responsibility from both people. An avoidant who is willing to grow can absolutely learn healthier patterns. They can learn to communicate fear instead of acting it out indirectly. They can learn that vulnerability does not equal weakness. But that transformation only happens through self-awareness. No amount of chasing can force emotional maturity onto another person. And this is where your power returns. The moment you stop trying to control someone's feelings and start protecting your own emotional foundation, you become stronger. You stop reacting to every emotional shift. You stop treating mixed signals like commands. You stop believing someone's inability to communicate clearly is proof that you are not enough. Because the truth is, emotionally healthy love feels safe, not confusing. It allows honesty instead of mind games. It encourages connection instead of emotional guessing. It creates clarity instead of constant anxiety. And when you understand the games avoidants play, you stop personalizing every action. You begin seeing the wounded pattern underneath the behavior. You develop compassion without losing boundaries. That balance is powerful because real love is not about proving your worth through suffering. Real love is two people learning how to feel safe enough to stop hiding from each other and from themselves. Mixed signals are one of the most emotionally confusing experiences in love. One moment you feel chosen, desired, important. The next moment you feel invisible, uncertain, and questioning everything. And when you are emotionally invested, that inconsistency doesn't just create confusion, it creates emotional dependency. But here is what most people never understand. Mixed signals are rarely random. In avoidant attachment patterns, they are often a defense mechanism rooted in deep fear of vulnerability and loss of control. At the core, the avoidant mind is constantly managing two competing forces. On one side is the desire for connection, the natural human need for love, intimacy, and emotional bonding. On the other side is the fear of losing independence, being overwhelmed, or being emotionally trapped. When intimacy increases, both forces activate at the same time, creating internal tension. So what happens externally is inconsistency. They move closer when they feel safe. They pull away when they feel emotionally exposed. They reach out when they miss connection. They withdraw when feelings intensify too quickly. To an untrained emotional eye, this looks like confusion or manipulation. But in many cases, it is actually an internal survival response. Their nervous system is not fully trusting intimacy, so it regulates distance as a form of emotional protection. The problem is, the person on the receiving end does not experience the internal fear, they only experience the behavior. And behavior without context feels like rejection. So the emotional cycle begins. You feel closeness, you relax. They pull away, you feel anxiety. You chase reassurance, they feel pressure. They withdraw more, you feel even more uncertainty. This cycle is what creates emotional addiction in relationships with avoidant patterns. The unpredictability makes the connection feel intense, even when it is unstable. Your brain begins to focus more on when will I feel close again, rather than is this emotionally healthy for me? And that is where people lose themselves. They start analyzing every message, every delay, every change in tone. They begin decoding silence like it is a hidden message. They look for patterns that promise certainty in something that is intentionally inconsistent. But mixed signals are not clarity waiting to be decoded. They are emotional instability being expressed indirectly. Avoidants often do not express fear directly because vulnerability feels unsafe. So instead of saying, I need space, they disappear. Instead of saying, I'm overwhelmed, they become cold. Instead of saying, I care but I'm scared, they act inconsistent. This indirect expression creates emotional confusion in their partner, who then tries to restore certainty through increased effort. But here is the truth most people struggle to accept. You cannot create consistency in someone who is not emotionally regulated within themselves. No amount of patience, love, or overgiving can stabilize a person who is still learning how to tolerate emotional intimacy. And yet, many people fall into the trap of believing, if I just love them correctly, they will stop being inconsistent. But love is not a correction tool for emotional patterns that were formed long before you arrived. The danger of mixed signals is not just confusion, it is erosion of self-trust. You begin doubting your perception. You begin ignoring your emotional needs. You begin accepting less clarity than you deserve. You begin staying in situations that feel emotionally unstable because the highs feel so powerful. And over time, you start adjusting yourself to match their inconsistency instead of maintaining your own emotional standards. But real emotional strength means refusing to abandon your clarity for temporary connection. It means understanding that consistency is not a luxury in love. It is a requirement for emotional safety because love that repeatedly confuses you is not love that is fully available. There is a difference between someone who is going through emotional difficulty and someone who consistently cannot offer stability. One can be worked through with communication and awareness. The other becomes a cycle of uncertainty that slowly drains your emotional energy. And the most important realization is this: you are not meant to live in emotional guessing games. Healthy love does not require decoding. It does not keep you in constant uncertainty. It does not make you question your worth every time distance appears. Instead, it builds clarity over time. It creates emotional safety. It allows both people to express needs without fear of punishment or withdrawal. When you understand mixed signals through this lens, you stop romanticizing confusion. You stop mistaking inconsistency for depth. You stop believing that emotional unpredictability is a sign of special connection. Instead, you begin valuing something far more powerful, emotional clarity, because clarity is where real love grows. And anything built on confusion will always demand too much of your peace. Silence is one of the most misunderstood behaviors in relationships, especially when it comes from someone who struggles with emotional closeness. To the person on the receiving end, silence can feel like rejection, punishment, or even emotional abandonment. It triggers anxiety, overthinking, and a desperate need for answers. But in many avoidant patterns, silence is not about lack of care, it is about emotional overload. When an avoidant becomes silent, something important is happening internally. It is not emptiness, it is not indifference. It is often an internal shutdown caused by emotional intensity that feels too big, too fast, or too overwhelming to process in real time. Their nervous system is trying to restore balance by stepping away from stimulation. Think of it like this. When emotions rise beyond what someone is trained to handle, their mind does not always know how to express it. So instead of engaging, explaining, or communicating vulnerability, they retreat into silence. Silence becomes their emotional safe zone, where they can regain control without having to expose what they are feeling. But here is where the pain enters the equation. The person who cares about them does not see the internal struggle. They only see absence. And absence without explanation creates emotional chaos. You start asking questions. Why are they ignoring me? Did I do something wrong? Are they losing interest? Should I say something? Should I chase them? And slowly, silence becomes louder than words ever were. In avoidant dynamics, silence is often a form of emotional regulation, not emotional rejection. It is their way of stepping back from intensity so they do not feel consumed by it. Many avoidants were never taught how to sit with emotional vulnerability while staying connected. So instead of staying present during emotional overwhelm, they disconnect. But this creates a painful imbalance because while one person is trying to calm themselves through distance, the other person is spiraling through uncertainty. And here is the truth. Silence has power because the human brain hates uncertainty more than pain itself. When communication stops, the mind fills the gap with fear-based stories. You begin interpreting silence as meaning something is wrong with you or wrong with the relationship. This is where emotional dependency often grows. The absence of communication becomes a trigger that activates attachment anxiety. And instead of staying centered, people begin reacting to silence instead of understanding it. They send multiple messages. They try to fix the situation. They over-explain their feelings. They search for closure in someone who is not emotionally available in that moment. But here is the deeper psychological truth. Chasing silence often reinforces it because when an avoidant feels overwhelmed, additional emotional pressure can intensify their need to withdraw further, not because they do not care, but because their system perceives emotional intensity as danger rather than connection. However, this is not a justification for emotional neglect. Understanding silence does not mean accepting a lack of respect, communication, or consistency indefinitely. There is a difference between temporary emotional withdrawal and a repeated pattern of avoidance that prevents emotional security. Healthy love requires communication. It requires accountability. It requires the ability to express space without creating confusion or anxiety in the other person. The mature version of emotional distance sounds like, I need some time to process, but I care about you and I'll come back. The unhealthy version looks like disappearing without clarity, leaving the other person in emotional uncertainty. And this is where emotional intelligence becomes essential. You must learn to observe silence without immediately attaching fear to it. Not every pause means abandonment. Not every delay means loss of interest. Sometimes silence is someone trying to regulate emotions they were never taught how to express. But at the same time, you must also protect your emotional boundaries because love should not keep you in a constant state of waiting, guessing, or emotional instability. You are not meant to live in relationships where clarity disappears every time emotions intensify. Real emotional strength is not about chasing silence. It is about responding to it with awareness instead of panic. It is the ability to say, I understand people need space, but I also need communication and respect in order to feel secure. And this is the shift that changes everything. When you stop personalizing silence and start observing patterns, you regain emotional control. You stop reacting from fear. You stop losing your center every time someone withdraws. And you begin to understand that someone's silence is not always a reflection of your worth. Sometimes it is a reflection of their capacity to handle emotional closeness. But your worth should never depend on decoding silence. Your peace should not be held hostage by someone else's inability to communicate clearly. And the more you learn to stay grounded during emotional distance, the more you step into emotional maturity where love is not built on anxiety but on clarity, self-respect, and mutual understanding. Real love with someone who has avoidant tendencies is not a game of chasing, convincing, or proving worth. It is a test of emotional maturity, self-respect, and inner stability. And the hardest truth to accept is this: you cannot build secure love with someone who is still emotionally unsafe with themselves unless there is awareness, willingness, and change from both sides. If you stay in a dynamic where avoidance is present, the first thing you must understand is emotional certainty does not come from them, it comes from you. Your clarity, your boundaries, and your self-respect determine whether the relationship becomes healing or draining. Avoidant individuals often struggle with emotional proximity, not because they don't feel, but because feeling deeply activates fear within them. So the relationship often oscillates between closeness and distance. In that space, many people lose their center. They begin reacting instead of responding. They begin adapting instead of standing firm, and slowly they start abandoning their own emotional needs just to keep connection alive. That is where the danger begins, because without boundaries, love becomes emotional self-erasure. Real love requires emotional structure, not control, not manipulation, but structure. You must know what is acceptable for your peace and what crosses your emotional limits. If someone repeatedly disappears without communication, you must ask yourself whether that aligns with your standards. If someone only shows affection inconsistently, you must ask whether that creates emotional safety for you. Boundaries are not punishment, they are clarity. And clarity is what avoidant dynamics often lack. But there is another truth that must be understood. Boundaries alone are not enough if they are not supported by emotional detachment from outcomes. Many people set boundaries but secretly hope the other person will change immediately. That expectation creates frustration, anxiety, and emotional pressure. Real emotional strength says, this is what I need to feel safe. If it cannot be met, I will make decisions that protect my peace. That mindset removes desperation from love. Avoidant relationships often test one major thing: your self-worth under emotional uncertainty. When someone pulls away, your instinct might be to overcompensate, to give more, to explain more, to try harder. But that reaction often weakens your position instead of strengthening it, because the moment you start abandoning yourself to keep someone, you shift the balance of love from mutual connection to emotional dependency. And no healthy relationship can survive that imbalance. The strongest energy you can bring into any relationship is emotional consistency within yourself. That means your mood, your identity, and your worth do not collapse based on someone else's temporary behavior. You remain grounded even when communication changes. You remain centered even when distance appears. You remain aware that love should not require you to lose yourself in order to keep it. But here is the deeper layer most people miss. Avoidant individuals are often deeply affected by emotional steadiness. When they expect chaos, pressure, or emotional reactions, and instead encounter calm clarity, it creates cognitive dissonance. It challenges their internal belief that intimacy always leads to emotional overwhelm. However, this does not mean you should suppress your emotions or pretend not to care. Emotional maturity is not emotional numbness. It is the ability to express feelings without losing control of yourself. You can say, I value consistency in communication because it helps me feel secure. Without saying you are hurting me, fix yourself immediately or I will collapse. That difference is everything. Because real connection requires honesty without emotional chaos. At the same time, you must accept a hard reality. You cannot heal someone who refuses to take responsibility for their emotional patterns. Awareness must come from them. Growth must come from willingness. You can inspire change through stability, but you cannot force transformation through effort. So emotional certainty in this context means knowing your truth even when the other person is uncertain. It means recognizing that love should not consistently feel like confusion, waiting, or emotional imbalance. It should not require you to constantly guess where you stand. It should not force you to shrink your needs to avoid triggering someone else's fear. True love allows both people to feel emotionally safe, even during discomfort. It allows space without abandonment. It allows closeness without fear. It allows communication without punishment. And when that balance does not exist, your responsibility is not to fix the other person. Your responsibility is to protect your emotional integrity, because the highest form of love is not losing yourself for someone else. It is standing in your wholeness while remaining open to connection. And that is where emotional certainty becomes your greatest strength, not as a reaction to them, but as a commitment to yourself. The most common mistake people make in relationships with emotionally avoidant partners is not love itself. It is how love is expressed when fear takes over. When someone you care about becomes inconsistent, distant, or emotionally unavailable, the natural human instinct is to move closer, to fix the distance, to restore certainty, to regain emotional safety. But in avoidant dynamics, that instinct often backfires in a way that slowly erodes your self-worth, because what starts as love can quietly turn into pursuit, and what starts as connection can become emotional chasing. At first, it feels justified. You are not trying to control them. You are trying to understand them. You are not trying to pressure them. You are trying to reconnect. You are not trying to lose yourself. You are trying to hold on to something that feels important. But over time, something subtle shifts. The focus stops being about mutual connection and starts becoming about emotional reassurance. You begin to monitor their behavior. You begin to decode their silence. You begin to adjust your mood based on their availability. And slowly, your emotional world starts orbiting around someone who is inconsistent with theirs. This is where the real damage begins. Not in their distance, but in your reaction to it. Because every time you chase reassurance from someone who fears emotional intensity, you unintentionally increase the very dynamic you are trying to fix. Your urgency creates pressure. Your need for clarity creates resistance. Your emotional intensity reinforces their need to withdraw. And suddenly, both people are stuck in opposite survival modes, one pursuing, one retreating, and neither feels safe. The avoidant partner begins to feel overwhelmed, not because you are wrong for needing love, but because their internal system associates emotional closeness with loss of control. Meanwhile, you begin to feel abandoned, not because they don't care, but because their way of coping with closeness is silence, distance, or emotional shutdown. And in that gap, anxiety grows. But here is the deeper truth that changes everything. Reassurance cannot be sustainably extracted from someone who is emotionally unavailable in the moment. You can receive temporary comfort, but not consistent emotional stability. You can get moments of warmth, but not reliable presence. So when you keep chasing reassurance, you are not just trying to feel better. You are training your nervous system to depend on inconsistency. That is where emotional dependency forms. You begin to believe that peace is something they give you, instead of something you cultivate within yourself. You start measuring your worth through their responses. You start interpreting their distance as a reflection of your value. And without realizing it, you slowly abandon your emotional independence in exchange for moments of connection. But love was never meant to function like emotional survival. Real love does not require constant proof. It does not require chasing someone to feel chosen. It does not require abandoning your dignity to receive attention. The truth is, the more you chase reassurance, the more you unintentionally weaken your position in your own life, because your emotional stability becomes dependent on someone who is not consistently available. And that is a fragile foundation for any human heart. Now, here is the turning point. Strength in these situations is not about shutting down your emotions. It is about redirecting them. Instead of seeking reassurance externally, you begin anchoring yourself internally. Instead of asking, do they still care about me? You begin asking, am I honoring my emotional needs in this dynamic? That shift is powerful because it moves you from reaction to awareness, from dependency to clarity, from chasing to choosing. And when you stop chasing unavailable reassurance, something important happens. You start seeing the relationship more clearly. You stop confusing anxiety with love. You stop interpreting inconsistency as depth. You stop believing that suffering is a sign of emotional connection. You begin to recognize patterns instead of getting lost in moments. And from that clarity, you gain something far more valuable than temporary reassurance. You gain self-respect, because the highest form of emotional strength is not convincing someone to stay emotionally available. It is refusing to lose yourself trying to keep someone close. And when you finally stop chasing reassurance from those who cannot consistently provide it, you return to yourself. You rebuild your emotional foundation. You reclaim your peace. And you stop negotiating your worth in moments of uncertainty. That is where real transformation begins. Not in changing them, but in no longer abandoning you.